This episode's guests are rock and roll photographer John Rowlands and author Bob Klanac. They have a new book out now called Shooting Stars, Telling Tales Behind the Lens of John Rowlands. John's a legendary rock and roll photographer. As a teen, he toured with the Dave Clark Five, the Rolling Stones, and the Beatles. He's photographed David Bowie, The Who, Rush, Kiss, Sam Cooke, Linda Ronstadt, Jimi Hendrix, Bob Dylan, Rod Stewart, Bruce Springsteen, Leonard Cohen, Elvis Presley, and the list goes on. John and Bob, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. Hey, thanks, Eric.
Bob, I've had you on before. We were talking about, last time you were on, I think maybe 2 years ago, talking about the book Promo Man that you worked with legendary promoter Nick Panaseco on. So it's good to have you back on. I think that was like 2 years ago, right?
I think it was 2021 or 2022, yeah.
Yeah, so John, a lot of your photos have been seen in books over the years, but here we get the stories behind the photos. What led to this idea, and how did you team up with Bob for the book?
Well, Bob has been privy to my library, and I was also very extensive on Facebook with it. So that all came about. And, of course, doing most of the pictures in Nick's book, he saw a lot of library shots that were mine, because Nick and Warner Brothers and Quality Records were an account I had, and every time Nick wanted the job done, I would shoot that, and I would even get to the point where I was doing something and knew that Nick's record company wasn't involved, so I would get him involved for the pictures he needed. So it just flipped over. They had these two resources here, and living in the same town, he could do it easily. So 2 years with Nick, 1 year with me.
John was doing these rock and Rowlands events in which he would show pictures and then talk about the stories behind the pictures. And that's where I got the idea that we should try and do a version of that in print. Because John, as you pointed out, Eric, has done several rock photo books, and his photos have been in other books as well. But I'm a story guy, and so I wanted to, and John would tell the stories behind the photos in these rock and Rowlands live events, and it just seemed like a natural thing to do.
Yeah, that's what I love about this book. You get the stories behind the photos. So let's get to some of those stories. John, you toured with the Dave Clark Five, the Stones, and the Beatles as a teenager. You were only 17. How did you manage to land those gigs?
The whole thing about it in general is the record industry was a very different show in those days. Promo people, press people ran the show as far as promo went, and I knew a lot of these people, even on the phone. I hadn't met them and didn't know them personally, but as the record industry changed, I was most into getting to know these guys, and grew with them and their jobs as a freelance outsider. That way I could do every single record company in Canada and a lot of the independent labels, and get what they need to do the promotion. And that's what culminated in Bob's book, and the stories behind it. The things that don't happen now. When, like, the Rolling Stones came to London, Ontario in 1965, 66. And I came down, sat in a parade of cars with them as we cruised through London to the Holiday Inn here. And I was in the same car as Brian Jones, which was a real treat for me. And here I am next to a fellow Pisces creative guy known to all their fans, and I'm waving at the same fans he's got. It was pretty funny at the time. I did the same thing with the Dave Clark Five, and I did the Canadian tour from here, London, Toronto, and it wound up in Sault Ste. Marie. So those were all things that were just thrown in and asked for. I was the current freelance photographer at Capitol Records, and Paul White, who paid for all my expenses out of petty cash. So I could do all this, and I said to Paul, is it okay to bring a friend? And he said, fine. So I followed the band in a Greyhound bus paying my ticket fare to get to the next city and be like a local photographer in all these towns. And that led me to other labels like London Records and the Rolling Stones and so many others after that. But the real genesis of it all, I started writing to entertainers that I liked, and a lot of the entertainers started writing back. So it was a teenage dream of mine to want to meet Annette Funicello and so on, and Bob Cummings, who had a TV show at the time as a photographer called Love That Bob. And Perry Como was a weekly program that we all liked and featured at least once a month, Brenda Lee. So these are all the people that I cut my teeth on, and just getting back to have these record company access and validity of doing their work led me to working for them. So it was all just a rolling into the next situation every time. So.
Bob, how fun was it for you just to get all these stories from John as you're putting together this book?
Well, I mean, I'm a music geek myself, so these stories were like manna from heaven. Plus, as a writer, you want to. What I wanted to do is have more people hear these stories because, as I say, John would tell them in these live events, but those were limited, to just people that were there. And I thought this way, in a book, they'll be around forever. So the book is on Amazon and will be on Amazon long after I'm gone. So I think it's important these stories are out there.
The Dave Clark Five, I know well, because as a Van Halen fan, that was the band that Eddie Van Halen talked about. That was a band that inspired him, really wanted to become, that's when he wanted to become a rock and roll musician. I mean, he and his brother Alex were fans of the Beatles, of course, but there's a Dave Clark Five that he really, really took to. I thought that was really cool.
I really enjoyed working with them. They were kind of like the Rough House Beatles with manners. Clean cut, same outfits every night, and accommodating to all the radio disc jockeys and whatnot that came out to the shows, posing a lot with the security teams of the OPP here in Ontario, and we're just gentlemen. I really like them, and I'm in Pieces, Bits and Pieces, all their songs were hot tunes of the day, and of course the tabloids all put together a rivalry between the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and the Dave Clark Five, and who did you like best, and all these very simple structured panel type of who do you like the best, and I was lucky I was part of all of that. Took them to pizzerias when I was in Ottawa because I lived there before. And all these things were added to my inventory of music personalities working out of my friend's dad's office, Phil McDonald. His father built the 401 from Windsor to Toronto at $1 million a mile. So I had a nice office when his dad wasn't home.
What was it like just experiencing that emergence of the Beatles and the Stones and Dave Clark Five, and especially the Beatles and the Stones? They were huge. Did you sense that this was going to be something really big?
Yes. Oh, yeah. We were part of that because starting with Capitol Records, I asked if I could bring my friend Phil, and they said, okay. It was logical to have two people working on the job, and for a personal friend to be doing this, the only thing I could put them to work doing was gathering autographs of these people just to prove to my friends that I really did meet them. And then a few days later, the pictures would be out in magazines in Canada. I got a pass from Santa Bodiac and was walking from one side of the gardens to the other backstage, so I wouldn't have to fight through the crowd. And I saw George and the Vox amplifier sound man there because he was out to monitor the sound of the Vox Super Beetle amplifiers. And at the Maple Leaf Gardens, this all funneled into electro-voiced tin speakers at the top of the gardens. So with every kid screaming for 36 minutes, you couldn't hear the band. And in order to do this, you had to go downstairs into the hockey dressing rooms with 3 blocks of cement bricks, isolating the sound down to hearable lyrics. And that was the physicality of it. And talking with the Vox guy, George said to me, "Do you want some dessert? We're having dessert in the dressing room here in a couple of minutes." So I joined the Beatles for rice pudding and had some dessert with the boys. And then afterwards, waiting to go on stage, there was a preamble by the local disc jockeys. I would get guitar lessons on John and George's guitars. They showed me how to play 8 days a week, and I feel fine. So it was a very personal thing, a very exciting thing, and a very unbelievable thing, but I've got pictures. And that's, I don't have any setup shots with the Beatles, but I have a shot of me in front of them at the press conference at the back of my neck, which was, so the people tell me, was highly identifiable. So that's, all I really wanted, and the fact that the record companies would give me money to do this was just an excellent arrangement. And I'm still in high school at 17. It was so much fun to ride this carousel of musical acts in the beginning, and then after a while just grow into the maturity of it all and a certain change to the record industry. But that was the premise from which it started, and I had a lot of fun on it, as did Phil.
Amazing. I've read about Chuck Berry being a shrewd businessman. There's a story in the book on your experience with Chuck Berry. You had an up-close experience with him. Can you talk about that? He talked about how he slept in a Cadillac, so he didn't have to pay to stay in hotels. This is a good story.
Well, that year, I met him on Elwood Glover's TV show, and started talking with him. I was at Ryerson at the time, studying photography, and he had just gotten a brand new video camera from Bo Diddley, because Bo was just in Japan and replaced his video outfit with a new Asai outfit and gave the old one to Chuck. So I knew about zooming and panning and all this, and covered the show well. And after the Elwood Glover show, we sat there for the whole interview to be played back, and Chuck said, "Hey, this is really good. What are you doing next week?" And I said, "Well, I'm in school, Chuck. What do you need?" So he says, "Well, $900 be good enough to take you away from school for a week?" So I joined the tour at that point in 1971. Saw how he worked, met some women that had his children, and only recently did I find out about his wife in St. Louis, and he's got duplicate wives around the country at the time. It was incredible to ride this bandwagon. Chuck was a really smart man, and his favorite hotel was his Cadillac. And, his favorite restaurant was icebox food that he packed the day before, and so on and so forth. And he made an extra $100,000 a year doing this. And, I worked with him on updated tours until I retired from the business. And he was a storybook every show. He'd want money up front in his case, $30,000 before he'd play. And then he wanted a 57 twin reverb, and if he didn't have one, he'd rent you his. Things like that were a lot of fun from Chuck, because he was quite a showman. I got a lot of his shots, but I didn't see any duck walk, but I have him leaning over and almost doing the duck walk. He was a fantastic entertainer. The records were all on the chart, big news. And it was a delight to know Chuck Berry, even though his reputation for getting along with most people was terrible.
You worked with Rod Stewart and Faces at a time when, as Bob writes, Stewart and the band were starting to crack. What happened?
we had waited at the airport for aircraft to bring them to Toronto from Detroit. And after 5 flights, we let the limos go. And then he came in, and reason being they were in jail because they did a show in Detroit, came back to the hotel. There were 2,000 girls in the lobby, and they had rooms on the 19th floor, and the elevators were shut down, so the guys had to run up to the rooms and get away from the girls. So Rod said to them the next day when they were checking out, everybody check out, but light something on fire in your room. So they did this, and that's why they were 5 flights late. And we were sitting at the airport, the promo team, and I had the newest car. So I drove Rod and his manager to the Inn on the Park Hotel, get him into the room and relax for a few minutes. And then we wanted to go in and have a drink at the bar, which was pretty exclusive in those days. And he had on a soccer scarf wrapped around his neck, part of his show, part of his persona at the time. And they said, sorry, sir, no tie, no admission. So there was an argument about that. And then he went downstairs on a spiral staircase. And at the Inn in the Park, they had a big Christmas tree. Well, he got up on a karate stance and sidekicked the Christmas tree onto the floor. We got in my car and drove down to the gardens immediately and drove right into the gardens with my car. So.
Hot Rod. Yeah, what about the Everly Brothers story? That's another great one. You walked in on a moment between the two brothers. They weren't getting along so well. This is back in 1971.
Yeah, well, they, at this time, for some reason, they were fighting. And there had been notices to the record company that, just be as cool as you can with them because they're fighting. So I had to photograph them, and, of course, Smiles, because I wanted them to look good because they were one of the bands that I used to think about rock photography when I was 10 years old. And some of their pictures showed them as very happy guys singing songs. And the pictures were so obvious they were singers. Anyway, I wanted them to get along. And so I came on with a very gay-sounding voice and said, hey, boys, come on, let's get together here and smile. Let's go smile. And, of course, they burst into laughter with that kind of thing, and it looked like they're friendly again. So it was not expected from them, but it did happen.
Well, I got to say, John, I am very jealous after reading your story about Linda Ronstadt. The photo in the book, she just is stunning in this photo. She's got the cutoff jeans, shorts, just beautiful. This takes place in Los Angeles, 1973.
And You're No Good was the record. And Glenn Fry and Don Henley were in the band. And Linda was going out with Albert Brooks at the time. One of the roadies told me down front, I'd met Linda at a little short press conference there, and he said, you should pay more attention to Linda because she really liked you. So I didn't have a chance to pay more attention to Linda, but was certainly in love with all of photography and happy to do shots. And throughout Nick's career at Warner's, then I got to do that kind of stuff. So once again, the excitement is the best word.
Bob, what do you think when you heard that story? What was running through your mind?
Well, you can imagine. I mean, I'm looking at this photo, and it's funny because John is about, I guess, 10 years older than me, so he was kind of like living the life that a lot of us, kind of thought we'd like to live. It's quite a lifestyle, and all the people that he met as well, and of course these stories, which are, like I said, manna from heaven.
Absolutely. And the Wolfman Jack Guess Who story is another good one. You contributed to their song Clap for the Wolfman.
Yeah, he was doing a car show in Toronto, and Burton was in the studio and had written the song Clap for the Wolfman because the Midnight Special was a big deal in those days. So with or without Wolf, he was going to do the record anyway. But hey, we got him after the show. Yeah, we showed up at Nimbus 9 Studios, and we ad-libbed our way through it. And the side story was he showed up with two girls and left with the two girls, and whatever happened with them was whatever happened. But Burton had put together the tracks and had a whole gag track for Wolf, and we laid them down. You've got the angles, I've got the curves, or you've got the curves, I've got the angles. I forget all the lyrics, but it just fit like the glove, and it was so spectacular and so easy to do. Bert was into all this recording stuff, and Nimbus 9 with Ben McPeak and Jack Richardson were up to capture it on the tape and the excitement of it all. And it went down. Session ended at 5 a.m, starting around midnight. And that's the record you hear today.
This episode's guests are rock and roll photographer John Rowlands and author Bob Klanac. They have a new book out now called Shooting Stars, Telling Tales Behind the Lens of John Rowlands. Bob, you note at the start of the book, quote, "This may come as a shock, but not every act John lensed is covered in this book. It would be easier to find an act of the rock and roll era John didn't shoot than the opposite." Was it a challenge for you to decide which ones to include and which to leave out? Did you have a limit on how many words you could write? Was there a page limit?
There really was no limit on words or anything. John and I went through, and as part of the process, we went through and looked at over 650 photos of his. Some were multiple versions of the same act at the same show or something. So, there's some overlap there. But we went through pretty much everything, and we didn't leave out. I don't think I left out much. I mean, it's on the other hand, having said that, even as we're listening today, John's got an amazing memory. He keeps tossing in new little tidbits. It's like, oh, okay, I don't really remember us talking about that. So John's memory is amazing and still is amazing.
That's what I was going to ask you about. That's the challenge, right? Because you write, quote, "For every story here, he would provide an exhaustive overview of fascinating details, as extraneous to the story as they are fascinating. For the sake of focus, many of these details are missing." So how challenging was that for you to have to decide on what details to leave out and what to leave in?
Well, I had to think like a reader. I had to sort of think about, is John at one point today was just talking about, and he mentioned the name of someone who, I can't remember what it was. It was in the context of one of the stories. And it's not a name that everyone's going to recognize, and it's not, key to the telling of the story, but it's just a sign of how much John remembers. The names of people that he worked with, just to a lesser degree sometimes, and just all the names. So it was simply a matter of trying to think like a reader. What does the reader need to know? What does the reader want to know? So it's kind of like you're being a bit of an editor at the same time. So the story flows.
John, did you have a diary that you kept, or is this all by memory?
I kept diaries, but not very accurately, but they were always a recollection for me to who I worked with and what year it was and whatnot. I did keep maybe 6 years worth, but the span of this book covers 45 years, and it really all started from writing letters to people. And, with good memories and good people I was writing to, then I got a lot of postcards back from Disney with Annette Funicello movies she did, and other celebrities like Bob Cummings owned the copyright on this car that would have wings on it and actually fly. Way back in the 50s, you had that. I loved his movie Saboteur, directed by Alfred Hitchcock, and so on and so on and so on. And there was obviously to these people quite a connection, and enough to write me back. And I even got a 6-page letter from Perry Como in pencil. I ultimately worked with Perry on a Anne Murray special in Quebec City. So taking something way in the background from, say, 17 or 12 years old and meeting the guy 10 or 15 years later was something I could fit in with as a conversation starter. And commonality that let me do my job. And the entertainer was often on my side saying, oh, let him alone. He's with me.
There's a chapter on Grace Slick, and you start off the chapter, Bob, by writing, quote, "It would be nigh near impossible to be a photographer looking through the lens at a rock goddess and not feel more than a twinge of something else. For John, Grace Slick of the Jefferson Airplane made his heart or something like it skip some beats." John, you had quite a relationship with Grace. Tell us about your experience working with her.
I was shooting stuff for the Nikon School of Photography at the time, and they had a special camera they wanted me to try out. And, I had often played with these special things on Rolling Stones tours and whatnot. But Jefferson Starship opened for the Stones on one tour, I think in 75. They did 6 dates with them, and I shot it with this camera that allowed me to take a 4-second time exposure and shoot the flash at the end of the exposure. So I captured a lot of motion streaking through her hair, highlight of her eyes is streaking, and she's looks like she's in flames, red flames, not yellow red. So I blew up a 16 by 20 and went to Pine Knob in Detroit and shot the band for the record company as well. And I backstage, I gave her this big shot, and she looked at it, and she said, "Wow, that is magical." And then she proceeded to stick her tongue down my throat, which was just a real good dream for me to talk about. That photograph is on the cover of the book in the upper left. To this day, it's still a magical shot and gets requested by fans of mine that they'll pay $200 to get one. So very, very happy.
I would think, yes. I would think. Alice Cooper's story is amazing. What a comeback story in terms of him getting sober and really taking control of his life and his career. You've worked with Alice, and it was through him that you got to photograph Vincent Price. Can you talk about that and the interesting thing that you did with the shadow on his face in the photo that you took, and his photos in the book?
The whole thing about Vincent came about with, once again, my relationship with Warner Brothers, and Gary Slade, who was Nick's boss at the time in promotion, thought, here's a good local photographer who could do the job. So they assigned me to shoot the show for the record company. And there's been a lot of other sources that use those pictures too. So I would go there, and I was certainly accessible to all the highlights of the show. And then meeting Alice and Vincent, and also having some background on knowing that Vincent Price was Red Skelton's best friend at the time. I wanted to shoot a portrait of Vincent, and I was there arranging the lights that didn't interfere with the TV show. And I worked on those for 2 hours and eventually said to Vincent, I'd like to take some shots. And I gathered up and shot it with my Hasselblad. I think I got 4 shots. And he said, well, take more, John, take more. I said, Mr. Price, that 4th shot is a great shot, and I'll show you tomorrow what I got. So I went home, processed the film, and I was shooting the next day again. So brought them to the studio and showed them to Vincent, and he was amazed, because if you put your hand in the middle of his face and feel the right side, you see the whimsical Vincent, and you turn the hand on the left side of his face, and you see the horrific Vincent Price. I said, I'm going to L.A. tomorrow to work with Red Skelton. I'll give a copy to Red. And he said to me, John, I'll give a copy to Red. Let me have this one. And that's how Red and he looked at those pictures. And I was in line for the cover of his biography that his son wrote, but never got back to me because I moved around so much in those days. But when I retired, I came back to London. So.
Are you originally from Canada?
Born in Oshawa, Canada, raised in Ottawa, and currently living in London.
I think my favorite story in the book has to do with Leonard Skinner. Bob, I'm going to ask you what your favorite story from the book is, or maybe a few stories. But if you could tell me this story, John, about Leonard Skinner, they had quite a reputation. They liked to start a few fights when they went out.
The Skinner Band was an incredible bunch of guys. I can't say anything wrong about any of them, probably because of my superficial knowledge of them and friendship. But 74, I met them for the first time, and I worked with them in 73 when they opened for The Who. But working with them in 74, I got to hang out with them after the show. We went to a bar. They couldn't find somebody that would fight with them, then they'd fight with themselves. So road manager always carried about $30,000 in cash in a Halliburton case. And that was to pay off the bartender. How much do I owe you for the broken mirrors and the broken bottles? And so
I love that. That's such a great story.
And that's how they paid up their tab.
Bob, do you have any favorite stories from the book that stand out for you?
I really do like the chapter on Leonard Cohen, mainly because it goes from the beginning of his career when John shot him, this great session in Montreal at his home, and it carries on through the Lou Reed story, all the way to the story where he ran into him again in California, and he was a Zen Buddhist monk. And then, of course, John got a chance to photograph him in the final chapter of his career when he went on tour again, and because he was out of money, because his manager robbed him blind, and so in order to kind of have some money, he had to go on tour again. And that tour consolidated him as a legendary icon, music icon, before he passed away. So I really kind of like the arc of Leonard Cohen's life as it's captured in the book in terms of John's stories. And John's photos of Leonard Cohen in the final stages of his career are terrific.
Yeah, he was a fascinating guy. There's an absolutely phenomenal photo you took, John, of David Bowie that's in this book, and it's the Archer photo. Bob, you write, quote, "More than any other artist, John Rowlands' lasting reputation is intertwined with his work with Bowie." John, can you share with us the story behind the Archer photo and how it was David who came up with that title?
I like David so much, having worked with him on Diamond Dogs, that when I got the tour for Station to Station album, he became the Thin White Duke. In order to get these shots to him as quick as possible, I put a darkroom in the hotel bathroom, brought along my little Durst enlarger, would process the film in Nikon tanks, hang them up to dry, which took 4 hours or so, just hanging in the shower in the hotel room. And then I'd cut them down and make contact sheets. And then around 9:30, I would go across the hallway to David's room, and we'd sit and have breakfast, enjoying the contact. David's enjoying them. And I came around that one of these shows at Maple Leaf Gardens produced The Archer. And he said, "Oh, you've got The Archer. That's great." And he gave me the background on it, that they were taken in Alicante, Spain. There are two sculptures there with metal leaf kind of wrappings around to show two archers with their bows pointed up and into the sea. And they are the namesake of the Archer photograph that he was emulating. So I had captured that, and he knew right away who it was, and my angle was good. My friend Rob Bowman has got shots very similar, but not captured with a Hasselblad, and not with the telephoto 250 that I was using on that night. Some of the mathematics aren't as good, but I have a sequence of shots leading up to it and going away from it. And I worked all that out the night before in Montreal, watched the show, made notes on where to be at what time. And then, of course, with the record company giving them gold records, platinum records, I had my validity established and could have the run of the gardens. Sat down beside Jeff and took the shot from the first row. And that's what, a professional photographer should do. Look at all the advantages you can get and make it better.
It's an amazing shot. Is David Bowie your favorite artist to shoot? Or do you have favorite artists that you always love to shoot that were just great on stage, perfect for a photographer?
Well, over the years, that's my favorite shot, no doubt. I wish I had been on some of the other tours that I missed, but very happy I did get the ones I got. And acts like Billy Gibbons and ZZ Top are always fantastic and fun. I've seen some of Billy's cars. I met him at a car show once, and we had some Diet Pepsi. And also I had a store in Palm Desert and was there one morning, and a guy went by with, I just caught him on the corner of my eye, and he looked like he had a hat on that Billy Gibbons wore. So I followed him for probably 20 feet behind him, and then got a little closer and said, "Hey, Billy," and he turned around. So it was Billy Gibbons taking advantage of the air conditioning in Palm Springs, walking through this mall for exercise. He was a patient at the Betty Ford and came there for recharging every now and again on the road. So whenever we saw each other, we had a great time. And it goes on to this day that my associate and friend, Max von Wenning, he comes out to see Max's art shows in Palm Desert, Palm Springs, and brings his girlfriend or wife with him, and living up to the memories. And of course, Max from Houston, Texas at the time, got to know the bass players quite well, and was a big fan of Billy's all along. So
Dusty Hill?
Yeah, it was a good, friendly situation. So his cars were at the National Hot Rod Association Museum, so I got to see the Mexican T-Bird and the 62 Cadillac and stuff that he had collected and refurbished to new, and also Cadzilla, made by Boyd Coffington. And he charged Billy in those days $900,000 for the car.
Wow, that's the one that's in the videos, I think, the Cadzilla.
Yeah, and it's now owned by the Peterson Museum in L.A.
You worked at what was the Who's last final public concert with Keith Moon before he passed away. This was at the Maple Leaf Gardens, I believe, October 21st, 1976. Keith was struggling on that tour. He managed to test your patience. Can you tell the nitroglycerin story?
Well, when the Who was there, they always like to end their tours in Canada to Toronto, and they would have a party there. First night would be a party for the Who, put on by the crew, and second night would be party for the Who, put on by the Who. I'd done my job, took my pictures and whatnot at the party, shook hands with everybody, went out to the parking lot, got in my friend's car, and were heading up University Avenue, and right out of the blue, fire truck came whipping around the corner in front of me and circled my car. And I said, what's going on here? And the fire guy is screaming at me, "Get out of the car and open your trunk." So I got out of the car and opened my trunk, and my camera case was in there. Open it. Opened it up, and there's 3 Hasselblads in there and sponge compartments, safe and sound. And all of a sudden, all the tension went out of this fire guy's body, and he just said, "Holy shit, we've been duped." And I said, "What the hell's going on? What the hell's going on?" And I didn't get any answers till the next day when I saw the Who again. And they said, when Keith saw you getting into your friend's car, he called it into the fire department that a certain Chevrolet or Cadillac or whatever we were in going up Avenue Road. And I don't know what distinction. I guess he had the plates. Had nitroglycerin in the trunk for the terrorists. And that accounted for everything that happened after that. After half an hour of explaining my naivety to it all, my girlfriend and my secretary continued home, and we had to pull over about 10 blocks away and just sit for a few minutes because we were so disorientated by what had happened and how it happened until the next day.
Oh my God. He must have done this every town and city he went in. I mean, it's just another day in the life of Keith Moon. Didn't he told Alice Cooper, this is in the book, Alice Cooper had a story about Keith Moon living in his garage.
Well, that's the fact. He was living in the garage, and he and his wife were going to downtown Phoenix at the time, and they were driving down the street, and the next thing you know, they see his eyes and head come over the front of the windshield and says, "Where are we going?" And it was just like Keith. He was a crazy man. He blew up his drums on set a lot. He liked to destroy things, and Keith is actually deaf in his left ear because the drums were always to the left of Pete. It cost him his hearing in the left ear.
He was quite a character. The new Bob Dylan movie is out. I thought it was amazing. Bob's somewhat of an enigma. How was your experience working with Bob Dylan?
Well, it was all kind of secondhand energy. I liked Bob. I shot the Rolling Thunder review. He was always not coming to the party afterwards. When I first met him years before that at Mariposa in Toronto, we used to sit in the hallway outside his room. There'd be 5 or 10 friends that knew his room, and we'd go up there and we'd sit and play his guitars with him in the hallway. And we could just actually hang around with Bob in those days. And, a lot of the official photography was done by Art Usherson, who's now in Atlanta, and myself for the record company. So this is a function that we used to do. And then the last time I saw Bob, he had written a program that they were selling. He was accessible. He was going to go to the party. He saw executives in the dressing room. So I posed them all together in the dressing room and proceeded to take shots. And my photo cable that goes from the camera to the flash broke. And I couldn't take any pictures with it. So I took it off, put it back in my camera case, and then I said, "Hold on, we're going to do pictures." So I dialed in 1/4 of a second shutter speed, and I manually tripped the flash in the 1/4 of a second. Thus, I got effective shutter speed being 1/50,000th of a second to grab the light for the picture. Froze the picture, made a great image on it, and I said, Bob kept saying, "But you didn't have your cable plugged in," and I assured him that we would have a great picture, and I'd show him tomorrow. And the same thing happened there. I showed up with the picture, and he went, "Wow, he couldn't believe it that I had figured this out in order to save the shot." So.
You impressed Bob Dylan. One last story, and that's about Bruce Springsteen. You worked with him on what you call the Mission Impossible tour. Why did you call it that?
Well, I got called by CBS and said, "We want you to do some tour dates in upper state New York. We're going to put you on the road with Bruce, and we want you to black out the Hasselblad chrome so he doesn't see you, and smuggle the long lens into the concert," and so on and so forth. Because Bruce was going out with Lynn Goldsmith, another fine photographer, and he always made Bruce look like a teddy bear, a nice guy, a friendly guy, and her aspect of loving this guy showed in her pictures. And they wanted Bruce as he really was, and I would shoot all the emotions that he showed, and CBS would buy them. Nobody was to know I was there in the crowd, and I got away with it. I had enough money to hire 2 kids to sit in front of me, 1 kid to sit beside me and shield me from that side of the aisle. And this kid sitting beside me, when he sees me take out a 250 from my boot, a telephoto lens to put on the Hasselblad, and he freaked out and he said, "Wow, man, right on."
What tour was that? I forget if it's in the. I'm sure it's in the book.
Yeah, it might have been 78.
When Goldsmith shot Springsteen's "Darkness on the Edge of Town" cover, and that came out in '78. So that seems about that time.
Quite a career, and these are just some of the stories in the book Shooting Stars, Telling Tales Behind the Lens of John Rowlands. It's out now. You can find it wherever books are sold. And John, where can people reach out to you if they want to contact you? Do you have a website that people can go to?
I don't have a website at the moment. I'm looking at website designers right now, but my email address is johnrobertrowlands@gmail.com.
Okay, johnrobertrowlands@gmail.com.
Yeah, if anyone wants to get any prints done, just email John, and he'll be happy to work it out with you.
All right, and Bob, you have a Facebook page. I know people can reach out to you there, right?
Yeah, definitely for both books, for this and for Promo Man, and definitely get a hold of me via those methods.
Great, John Rowlands, Bob Klanac. Thanks so much, guys, for coming on, sharing these stories.
Thanks for having us, Eric.
Thank you, sir.